Hello and welcome into Off the Bench here on a Monday. It's a glorious Monday here in the Queen City. It's warm. There's no snow on the ground. The Bengals played well yesterday. It is a glorious, glorious Monday, but it's going to get better. And if there's any allegory, if there's any anything that can mirror maybe the sentiment or message of this show, is that things can get better here in town. But they're really, really bad right now. I'm Reed Mouse. Bengals lost. Got shut out yesterday to the Baltimore Ravens. And one of the brave, the few, the proud, that stood in Paycor Stadium had to wipe off his own seat. The gall of the Bengals to make him wipe off his own seat. Our very own Stone Shield. Stone, you warmed up at all?
I am, yes. I am. All warmed up, ready to go. Not an ideal look for the organization. I'm not too bent out of shape about it. I mean, like, there was snow. I get most other stadiums probably would have taken care of it a little bit better. Took a little bit longer to get into the game with some of the gates not being open. But I think the worst part, obviously, is going out there and not scoring a single point.
Yeah. I'll get into that. I'll get into the stadium and everything like that. I saw Mo Egger put out a tweet that I mostly agree with, basically just saying that if the Bengals were playing good football, I think this would be a non-story. If the Bengals even won yesterday, it'd be a lesser story. But that's not what happened, so we are going to talk about it. We are literally live right after the alarms here in this office building. We're going off for 15 minutes. We weren't sure if we were going to get up and around, but Hamilton's fire department came around and shut off the fire alarms right at 10 o'clock. So here we are, and we're ready to rip. As a little behind baseball here. When it comes to Monday's shows, it's normally just knee-jerk reactions. Not a whole lot of well-thought-out plans, but we kind of just push the ball down the hill, and we'll see where it takes us, and that's what today is mostly going to be about. And I hate to keep bringing up the arguments of weeks past, months past, but we debated frequently on this show about the validity of bringing Joe Burrow back, and it's a point that is well past. But the reason I bring it up is because we lost the one thing that I don't even think anybody saw happening, and that was the hope that when Joe is around and Joe's here, this team is still viable. And they've looked good in the 12 quarters that he's been around. They've looked good for, 1.5 games? 7 of the 12 quarters looked like a really, really good team. But as we saw for 4 quarters in there yesterday, they looked, for the most part, I don't want to say they quit, because I don't think they did, but they at least looked disengaged and a little checked out. And we'll break that all down today about our opinions on how they played, if we thought that they gave up on Zach Taylor, if we thought they're checked out, if the glimmering light at the end of the tunnel, which was a healthy Joe Burrow and a mediocre defense, can still get us to where we think it can get us, or if that seems not just a few feet away or a few good players away, but miles and miles, maybe even light years away from where this team is, this franchise is. But more than anything, really more than anything, what happened yesterday at Paycor Stadium in sub-freezing temperatures, a day after 7 inches of snow cascaded on the stadium, was we saw full hand, a perfect painted picture of what this franchise is. A franchise that tries to cut the corners. A franchise that doesn't go above and beyond. A franchise that, when push comes to shove, they're lying on the mat. From the way that they treated fans, from the way that the team played, from the way that they were coached, pretty much we saw in real time what everyone seemingly outside of this city has been well aware of for decades. And that this franchise is not up to snuff. They're not there. They're not close. They're cheap. As Zach Moss, the Bengals legend Zach Moss, said yesterday, it's the worst franchise in professional sports. I don't know if it's that far. There's a lot of bad ones. It just doesn't make sense how we are here when we have an ownership group who I truly believe cares. I think Mike Brown cares. I think Katie Blackburn cares. But as certain national pundits say, it's a mom and pop, quite literally, pop and daughter organization. It's in the most competitive industry, professional sports league in the country. We are running it like it's Pop Warner football. But let's dive into the game, maybe. Let's dive in to how the Bengals played. 24-0. Even in the temperature, the degrees that they had against a defense that at times had been reeling, against a defense that you just put up 32 points on a few weeks prior. Now, that was off of a couple turnovers. And playing against a quarterback that Lamar Jackson did not play well. They were unable, with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, to score any points up on the board. And I don't care who the play caller is. I don't care if T. Higgins wasn't there. I don't care the temperature and the weather. That seems impossible, but it was. It was possible, as we saw it yesterday. And what did it take? It took Joe Burrow playing maybe the worst game of his career, and Jamar Chase, who statistically had a pretty good game. Outside of the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown in 2 months, statistically he's having a really great season. This team still put zeros on the board. And I had been saying for weeks, well before Joe Burrow came back, after the Joe Flacco game and on Thursday Night Football, and we lose to the Jets and the Bears and then the Steelers, and I had been saying that it feels like this team is much closer, because they are, the worst team in the league than even not the best team in the league, but even the last team that's going to make the playoffs. In a contending team, even with losing their Super Bowl quarterback, their superstar quarterback for 9 weeks, does better than 1-8. They are coached better than 1-8. They play better than that. But it just feels not like a broken record, but like the whole phonograph had been smashed to pieces. Because this team, for 14 games this season, has played well in exactly 2.5 of them, 3 of them. Did not play well against the Browns. I'll give you against the Jags. They're unstoppable if you throw them on Thursday Night Football. Playing the Steelers and the Ravens. Thanksgiving and that other Thursday Night Football game, we're the best team in the league. But at 1 p.m. on a Sunday, this team is terrible. And here's the realistic faction of what we saw yesterday. This team is not anywhere close. The hope that was once alive that, hey, we get like 2 more defensive players. We just play a little bit better on defense. This team can get in the postseason, and we know with Joe anything can happen. We know that we are feisty. We know that we are a team to be feared in the AFC. But now we fully understand that this team isn't anywhere near that. It's not close to that, but that can be a good thing too. Because even though that realization feels like a gut punch, feels like a kick to the groin, it feels like we are farther away from competing than we've been since the 2020 season or the 2019 season, where we were getting ready to have the first overall pick. Well, it feels like we are so far away from the aspirations and the window being Joe Burrow's entire career and getting there. There is, quote-unquote, solace of it all. There is a realization that this team has to pretty much do what I said when they lost to the Vikings, when they lost to the Broncos, when they went on that horrific 4-game losing streak where they were the worst team in the league. It's that this team has to pretty much tear it all down. I mean, not Joe, not Jamar, but it is abundantly clear that this team isn't just a few free agents or 1 or 2 draft picks hitting. This team is really, really far away from competing, which is a good thing in the fact that we are all well aware. Not just us as fans, not just national pundits, not just local media, but the team, the organization, and the pressure that they're going to feel now is well aware that this team has to make drastic changes in the way that they operate, who coaches the team, who makes the player personnel decisions, all the above. There's gonna need to be drastic changes, or you run the risk of losing all the hope. You run the risk of not just being a laughing stock, but being what everyone truly believes of you, which is the worst run franchise in the league and maybe all of professional sports. Stone, besides the thoughts that were racing through your mind of, man, I wish I was just a little warmer. I wish the sun would come out. I wish the wind would stop blowing. What was going through your head yesterday at Paycor Stadium watching that game?
Yeah, a lot of different things. This is the worst performance we've seen from Joe Burrow since, week 1 last year against the Patriots, kind of, I would say. And, it just shows you when he's not good just how bad and ugly this thing can get, right? Because Joe Burrow, we've talked at length about how he can mask a lot of the issues of this team. Well, if he goes out there and puts a stinker out on the board, and, he was bad, and, for a guy that's getting paid as much as him, really bad. But, I've seen worse performances from quarterbacks in the National Football League. But
Sure.
for Joe Burrow's standards, that was a horrible game.
100%.
I think we can all agree on that. And it just shows you how far away this team is. And, they asked him afterwards at the press conference just how far he thinks they are as far as getting back to a playoff championship caliber team. He said not very far, but, you just couldn't help but shake your head and go, my goodness, if Joe is not incredible out there, this team is absolutely cooked. You had the drops were an issue, right? Jamar had a couple. Yoshi had one. DJ Juan Drago had one. Could have been an interception. So that wasn't good. I think defensively, some reason to maybe be optimistic, but at the end of the day, it wasn't good enough, right? I mean, I think that drive for Baltimore right before the half kind of perfectly encapsulated how we feel about the Bengals defense, because it was 7-0 at that point. And then if you can hold them to a field goal, 10-0, or hold them to no points, 7-0, you get the ball to start the second half, you feel good. But that drive from Lamar right before half is just bad, giving up chunk plays, and then Geno Stone getting cooked over the top for the touchdown. So a lot going through my mind, but ultimately my biggest takeaway is, wow, this team is just so far away, which is crazy and hard to believe because it feels like yesterday, but at the same time feels like 20 years ago when they were playing for the AFC title. You
fought me tooth and nail about the whether Joe should come back, and that was a discussion that we had multiple days for multiple weeks about whether we think this was good. Your opinion is if you're best, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but your opinion was if one of the best quarterbacks in the league is ready to play, if your franchise player is ready to play, you play him. Yeah. Even if you've got very little hope to make the postseason, you play him. My take is the only reason there. I could not find a competitive reason to play him. If you just want to say he's ready to play, so he plays, that's really the only reason, which was the swan song of it all. Part of my concern was always that, hey, if he comes back, well, he's going to come back a little hobbled. He is fragile. I just don't want him to get hurt. And honestly, I want to lose games. To be quite frank, I want to get closer, to get higher up in the draft, because it seems like when this team drafts at the end or even in the middle of the first round or the second and third round, we don't hit a very high clip. So I'm trying to get the best possibility to compete in 2026. One thing that I did not foresee when I fought you on that was that this force of nature here in Cincinnati, this piece that we all believe, which was Joe Burrow is one of, if not the best quarterback in the league. And he can take us to the highest of heights. As long as he's out there, we can compete with anyone. That hope, because that's what it is. It's hopium. It's. We've seen it before, and that's what's hanging on for dear life. Why 64,000 people showed up to the game yesterday, despite there being no reason to be there, because it was negative degrees, and the Bengals were already on the borderline at the fingertips of making a postseason run. So the only thing that was holding Bengals fans there was this hopium that, hey, someday this Bengals team, if they get just two more things right, this team is right back in the mix of things here in the AFC. I feel like that has now gone through the fingers. Are you there yet? Are you there about, did it kill your hope even a little bit watching that game yesterday, going like, oh man, this team isn't very good, and maybe Joe Burrow can't overcome all these things?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly enters your mind. I think we were talking off air how, well, if the Bengals, went on this run, ended up 8 or 9, maybe a lot of people would say, or the organization would say, oh, just run it back. When Joe Burrow's healthy, we're good. And I think this is bringing to light that, there's a lot of other issues here at play. So I do think, the grand scope of the organization and where you go forward over the next few years, this is probably positive that it happened this way, right? Like, again, if you win all these games and then just barely miss the playoffs, I think, a lot of people within that front office and that organization might say, yeah, let's just kind of run it back with what we got. When Joe Burrow's healthy, we go out there and we win. And I think you're starting to see here, especially, scoring no points. Like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase played football and scored 0 points. Singular, 0 U.S. points. Zero.
U.S.
And,
as opposed to
yes.
European.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I just think it's hard to wrap your head around, right, that those two guys were out there and they did not score a single point. So clearly, serious change needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I had on this show, I can't believe I had been pushed so far to one way about this cannot continue with Zach. And the bigger problem, he's not the biggest problem. I think the bigger problem is old Dookie at the top of the whole thing. And I said on the show last week that this team needs to at least show me something in the fact of, and show, not me something, show us all something. All the fans, the ones that still show up to your stadium when it's negative degrees out and your team is out of the postseason hunt, that they are willing to do something for this franchise, that they're willing to make a significant step forward, that the current trajectory, the current route in which they're moving is not good enough. It's not close enough. So the Bengals needed to do something, and I still believe that. So the question is now, do they believe it? Do the decision makers, do Katie Blackburn and Mike Brown, do they see what happened yesterday and are finally on board of going, oh yeah, maybe those lunatic fans that buy all of our jerseys and dress up in stripes and Bengal garb and all the ones that populate Longworth Hall or the hoity-toities like Stone that get right in the lot right next to the stadium. Maybe all those fans deserve and are right to, we've got to be proactive in the change. We can't sit on our hands any longer because that's what teams do. When things aren't working well, you do something proactive. And maybe it's reactive at this point, but at least it's something. At least it's something. It's not just going on out there and be like, you know what, we've missed on the last few classes of free agency. We've missed on the last few draft classes, but man, you remember 2021? That was awesome. Let's do that again. The reason 2020 happened was because 2021 happened was because of significant change. They went to an offensive young head coach in a time where that's what wins in this league. Young head coaches with a new quarterback. They supplemented. They had a really good defensive coordinator in Lou Anarumo, and they supplemented some promising young talent with a really good haul defensively. And they hit on every single one for the most part. That was proactive. Now we're in a reactive state, but there still needs to be change. There still needs to be something from this team. They still need to look at this organization, the ones that are now 4-10 and are going to miss a third consecutive postseason with Joe Burrow at the helm, and he was hurt for a great majority of the season. But they're looking at this organization, the same organization that doesn't clean off the seats for its fans, and go, yeah, there does need to be something new here. And what that is, I don't know. I've got a lot of suggestions. If they got a little box down at Paycor Stadium where we can leave little notes, let me know, because I'll fill it up with some suggestions. Starting with a guy, someone to take Duke Tobin's role, probably someone to take Zach Taylor's role. I think another part, as I'll somewhat transition into a new talking point of yesterday's game, it may be Stone, because I'm gonna rely on you, because I think that you might have a different opinion, or maybe you will. There was this sentiment from Bengals fans yesterday. Every Bengals fan that I was watching the game with, a lot of them said the same thing. This team quit. This team doesn't want to be there. They quit. And I don't know if I would go there, because saying an athlete, even at the professional level, quit, it's a serious accusation. Giving up, quit. What I have absolutely no problem saying is that this team looked from Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase, Andre, from the top down to the bottom for the great majority of this game. This team did look disengaged, not fully locked in. This team understood that its postseason hope was gone in the wind after Josh Allen's comeback win last Sunday. It was completely gone. And all of the great optimism that they had following the Thanksgiving win over the Ravens was by the wayside. And mixed in with the weather that no one wanted to be outside for. I shoveled like 7 driveways yesterday morning. I didn't want to be outside. You mix with that, and this team, they didn't quit, but they certainly weren't locked in. They certainly weren't engaged in that game. Because I have a hard time believing that even a banged-up Joe Burrow and everything that he said, all the segments that we've done on this show and that have made the national rounds of, is Joe Burrow having fun? Is he one out of this organization? And then he shows up and has that performance. It's a culmination. It's the domino hitting one after another, hitting one after another. They're falling in line, and this team just seemed disengaged. Stone, you asked me point blank before the show started if I thought they quit. Do you think they quit?
No, I agree with you. I think disengaged is probably the better term. I definitely feel like the weather affected them more than it affected Baltimore. Baltimore clearly had a plan coming in the game. They're like, yeah, Lamar, we're not going to ask you to do a heck of a lot in this game. Lamar only ran it twice, and he only threw it 12 times. They only completed 8 passes. So they were very much keyed in on, all right, let's play some defense. Let's try to limit Joe Burrow, and let's run the football, and let's own this time of possession battle and kind of just try to keep it in our hands and away from Joe Burrow. It didn't end up playing out like that, actually, because the Bengals had the ball a lot in this game. They just weren't able to translate it into any points. But, no, quitting, I think if you watch the UC Bearcats against Georgia, that team quit. That team quit, absolutely. But I didn't think this Bengals team quit. But disengaged, I think, is a good word. Cold is a good word as well. They just looked a little bit colder than Baltimore did out there, in my opinion. And, we'll see how this thing plays out going forward. But there's still plenty with 3 games left. There's still an opportunity for them to quit, but I didn't quite see that yet. In this one. But maybe, the distractions throughout the week, as you mentioned, the Burrow press conference, the midweek press conference made its rounds nationally. Like, did that have an effect on Burrow's performance? He usually is good about compartmentalizing and kind of blocking that out, but when he has a stinker, the first stinker that we've seen in a really long time, you can't help but try to, maybe connect the dots there.
Yeah, no, it's The best way of summarizing this all, of what we saw yesterday, and I'll give credit to Stone Shields, Michael Stone Shields on this one, because it was the first thing he said to me when I walked in the office this morning, besides, hey, it's kind of cold in here. The first thing he told me is it's just a bad look across the board for the entire organization, to where people are talking about this organization once again in an incredibly negative light, that they're wasting this generational talent, that this is a cheap organization. And what happens? They don't have enough staff to open up all the gates. They don't clear off the seats. That's before the game even kicks off. And what happens? This team that has predicated its entire future on, we're going to score 1 billion points, try and outscore us, which, by the way, most teams do. They put a 0 up on the board against an okay defense. A defense that at times has been one of the worst in the league. A defense that you scored 32 points on. And I get it was cold. I get no one wanted to be out there. But from the way the organization showed itself before the game, from the way that the team played during the game, and the way that the superstars played during the game, and the coach, and they looked disengaged, and it just all is a bad look for an already bad-looking franchise. It's hilarious that I was fooled, that we all were fooled. Maybe not all of us. Maybe the more cynical fans weren't fooled. That we all were fooled into this dream of, this is the new Bengals norm. We win playoff games. We go to the Super Bowl. We go to the AFC Championship game. I fully believed that was where we were at. We had a hotshot young coach that players love playing for. Oh, the chemistry is great. Or as Joe would say, it's fun. And this team is, the Paycor Stadium, the worst, maybe worst stadium in all of professional sports. They're making upgrades to it. We're paying guys top dollar. We're having the highest paid non-quarterback and the highest paid player ever in the league. This isn't cheap. And we won't build you a full indoor facility, but we'll put a bubble up there. That way they can at least stay warm when they're practicing. I was fooled into it all, man. I was there. I was ready for the Bengals to take me to the promised land. I was so excited to finally be rooting for a team that consistently competes in this league. And we haven't really since the Joe Burrow injury in the 2023 season. This team has had flashes of looking really good, but for the great majority, especially this season, this team has been piss poor. On the defensive side, drafting free agents, from even the press surrounding the team of how they address things. It's just been kind of piss poor. And I can't believe I feel like such an idiot. And maybe it just speaks to being a fan, that you want to believe that you can turn the page, like hope springs eternal, right? Like you just think that you're there. You just think you're there and you're always going to be there. But this league is so competitive. One false step, or in the Bengals case, is about a half dozen of them. No, about 2 dozen of them can put you in this position where they're 4-10. We have a coach who I think at this point probably will be back, but I can't believe he will be. I hope that Mike Brown and Katie Blackburn, because that's all I can do. I can sit here and cross my fingers that they make some significant change, because what we're seeing right now ain't good enough. And Duke Tobin has been here for 25 years. He's going to probably be back, but once again, I'm crossing my fingers. And maybe Al Golden, the defensive coordinator, can get some better players. And maybe Shamar Stewart turns into the best edge rusher in the league. Well, we all know that's probably all not going to happen. But maybe that falling as flat on its face as the Bengals did yesterday and have really for this entire season, they will finally do what the smarter fans, the cynical fans, what the national media has been telling us for a while, which is this team has to evolve into a modern-day franchise. The franchise of modernity, like, this team is still ran like it's 1968, the inaugural season at Nippert Stadium. That's how we're still running it up. That's how we're operating this whole thing. Stone, let me ask you this. One, because you pushed back against me, and I'm sorry for putting words in your mouth about conversations that we had in the past. I think you and I are both on board with they need, like Duke Tobin, maybe not calling for his job, but they need to have some new degree there. But are you on board with what you saw yesterday, that I think this team needs to go in a new direction, both with Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin, or are you still not quite there yet?
I mean, I think they need to be evaluated throughout the rest of the way. I know a lot of people are checked out here, but there's still a few more games. I think they're big games for a lot of people, a lot of coaches, a lot of people on the staff, certainly Zach Taylor as well. He's the play caller and the head coach, and his team scored 0 points. It does not get any worse than that. So he absolutely needs to be evaluated here over the course of the next few weeks. How this team plays over the course of the next few weeks needs to be evaluated, and ultimately they'll go from there. But, I mean, you said I got no issue calling for Duke Tobin to be replaced. I have no issue doing that. That, to me, is a change that absolutely needs to happen. And a lot of people would say if you're going to bring in a new GM, you need to bring in a new head coach with him. And, people say that, I'm this Zach Taylor apologist or whatever. I've defended Zach in the past, but I also don't think he's Nick Saban. I don't have blinders on by any stretch of the imagination. I see what's happening out there. If you're coaching and your team's playing the way that they've been playing over the course of this year, absolutely. You're coaching for your job each and every week. So we'll see. I think we'll sit down after the end of the season and hash it out, the pros and cons of moving on, and ultimately see what this team decides to do. But what I always continue to remind people is that you want to get rid of Zach Taylor, that's just fine. But you're not paying $10 million to get a new head coach in here. You're going to be paying him $4 or $5 million. It's going to be bottom of the barrel stuff. And we talked about the hometown discount with Kyle Schwarber. That obviously didn't end up working out. Is there some kind of discount a coach is going to be willing to take to work with Joe Burrow? Perhaps. But that absolutely is a discussion that we're going to continue to have over the course of the next few weeks. And these are big weeks for Zach, as obviously the Bengals are eliminated now. So for the scope of getting into the playoffs, not big weeks at all. But how this team plays over the next 3 games is very big, in my opinion. Yeah, no, there's going to be a closer eye on pretty much how everyone operates. They're going to need to button it up and everything. It is worth bringing up the money, because that's where a great majority, it's a cheap franchise. So that's where even a non-cheap franchise, as money is the driving factor behind a lot of things. And Zach Taylor's making about $4.5 million. And as I've actually argued on this show before, I think when it comes to franchises in this league, the best return on investment you can possibly make outside of a franchise rookie quarterback deal is a head coach. The fact that dudes like Andy Reid and Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are getting around $15 to $20 million, I think 18 is the most that they make. That's an incredible return on investment. Looking at certain players in this league, ask me right now, do you get a better return on investment on Jim Harbaugh or Mike Vrabel or B.J. Hill and Mike Gesicki? We know those answers. And you are right about the Bengals have always cut the corners. They didn't have different entry gates open. I don't know. I haven't seen the report, but my guess is because they couldn't get enough personnel in to work those gates. So they had to limit them down instead of just up and pay and making it to a point where people, all right, I can't miss work today, even though it's going to be 5 degrees because I'm going to get paid 3 times as much, whatever it is.
I assume that's what happened. I am speculating a lot there. But this team is, even if they fire Zach Taylor, they're going to look at the head coaching market and realize, oh, it's changed. When we hired Zach Taylor in 2019, you can get by with, I mean, Zach Taylor wasn't a sparkling name on many people's head coaching boards. In fact, it was more often than not, people are like, huh? Who? Who is that? That name was thrown around, and you can get a guy for $4 million, $5 million. But now the market is 10, 15, 20. And I think we all are pretty aware that they're not going to go for that, even though it's what good franchises do. The Chargers been floundering, even though they had a franchise quarterback for decades. One of the from Phillip Rivers and Drew Brees and Dan Fouts and Justin Herbert, they couldn't get over the hump because they never had great coaching. And no, they brought in a good coach. The Bill Belichick had left the New England Patriots in shambles. And what does Mike Vrabel come in? Well, he comes in and, he makes them one of the best teams in the AFC. And, the Denver Broncos had the worst cap situation in the history of the sport. And Sean Payton goes in there, drafts Bo Nix, and they're winning. They look really, really good. There's certain things in life that you can thrift on. There are. I don't think you need to be buying name brand tissue paper. I don't think you need to be buying name brand milk. Just get the Kroger. Just go in there and get a half gallon. There are certain things in this life where you spend a little extra money and it goes a long way. And in this sport, in the NFL, it's abundantly clear. It's crystal clear that if you want to compete, you've got to get the head coach right, and you got to spend money to do that. And you can look around and go like, well, I don't know who's available. I know Chatterbox put out a list of 10 potential targets. And it scares people. The unknown scares people. As optimistic you can be about the unknown, about like, oh, we could get something great. There's people that look at it and go, well, that scares me. Zach Taylor doesn't know. And I truly believe Zach Taylor does an okay job. But it's pretty clear that he isn't able to overcome the rest of the deficiencies with the team. So this Bengals team, if they do go down that route, if they do get to the point where they go, okay, it's not working here, Zach. We appreciate it. Thank you for the Super Bowl year. You've won more playoff games than any coach in this franchise's history. But 3 consecutive seasons without Joe. We needed to win 3 or 4 games over a 9-week period to keep this season afloat, and you went 1-8 before Joe Burrow could come back. And, oh, by the way, he came back early, but you killed the season before he could get a chance to come back. If the Bengals decide to go that route, they cannot do it cheaply. And that's what concerns people that have said, maybe we should just keep Zach Taylor around because it's the known devil. The devil you know is better than the one you don't. I don't know, man. I don't know. It does feel like if the Bengals do fire Zach Taylor, we will be in a worse spot if we go out and we'll just get another $4 million guy. We'll get the quarterback coach from Indiana University because they just got the Heisman winner. Like, it's something stupid like that. But they can't. They have a golden opportunity in the form of that blonde-haired boy that is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, maybe the best in the history of this franchise, maybe the best in the world at this current moment, who played his worst game that I've seen him play in a long time yesterday, maybe ever. When you've got this opportunity, you've got to go outside your comfort zone. You've got to do something drastic, and that is spend $15 million on a head coach. Because I guarantee if you hit, I guarantee if you get the right guy, Mike Brown and Katie Blackburn in the ownership group, the Brown family, I promise it'll be worth every cent you pay. I promise you that. To where I've said these names, and please don't kill me. If Mike Tomlin becomes available for the Pittsburgh Steelers, or John Harbaugh, or whatever name you want to go that's going to cost some money, John Gruden, whoever you want, those guys come with a $15 million price tag. Yeah, it's going to be an attractive spot to come coach at because of Joe Burrow, and maybe you can whittle him down some money, but you're going to be spending at least 8 digits. You're going to be spending in the tens of millions of dollars per year on this coach. But I promise the Bengals ownership, Mike Brown, I promise them that you will make your money back if it works. If it's not a complete flop. To where if you get an adult in the room, not a young guy who seems like a fantastic guy who gets along with the quarterback and had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay 6 years ago. Not if you get him in the house for $4 million, but if you go and get an adult, maybe a defensive guy that can right the ship on this defensive side of the ball and pray that you get the offensive side right. Someone who's won a lot of games or at least built a great team before, and I don't know what that looks like. We can speculate on it for months to come. But I promise that the Chargers ownership thinks they've got a bargain on Jim Harbaugh. Bob Kraft and the Patriots think they've got a bargain with Mike Vrabel. The Hunt family hasn't batted an eye on pushing those direct deposits to Andy Reid. And I'll ask, and this is me just firing from the hip here, what big-time coach has been hired in the past few years for $15 million at the NFL level that those ownership groups are going like, oh, yeah, maybe that was maybe we shouldn't have spent that much money. Yeah, that was a bad one. Set us back a long way. Because I can't think of any. Maybe you guys will tell me in the chat who it is. Is there any chance, Stone, that if the Bengals do get rid of Zach Taylor, that they can finally become a franchise in modernity that'll spend tens of millions of dollars on a coach? Or is that just no?
No chance.
You don't think that there's a hope based off, because I do think that they look around the league and say like, oh, well, that's what this team's doing. That's what this team's doing. It is a copycat league. And the Bengals are often at the back end of that. You don't think that they can look around and see what Sean Payton's done and Jim Harbaugh and Mike Vrabel, what Ben Johnson's done in Chicago, what these teams have done, and say, oh, we should attempt that? You don't think they'll look around that and say, we should attempt that?
I'm just basing it off of what we've seen from this team in years past, right? Like you and me are sitting here talking about it like, heck yeah, you got Joe Burrow, you got some talent on this roster, obviously with Chase Higgins and others. Go get some guy that is qualified and you know he can come in here and do a good job and just pay him the money. And that makes a lot of sense to you and me, and it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people watching this right now. But they have done nothing to show me that they would do such a thing. And I know other teams are starting to do it more. The Chargers, for the longest time, wouldn't pay the head coach. Now all of a sudden they did. They clearly have a guy in Harbaugh that knows what he's doing. I don't see Cincinnati doing it. I really don't.
I stopped short. I really did. I stopped short on getting really angry because I think you're right. We look around, and I just listed it out, and I'll list them again. The Broncos were in the worst cap situation in the league. They go out and get a proven winner in Sean Payton, who even in year one it was a disaster because they still had Russell Wilson, and he turns around immediately. And the Chargers, after coach after coach after coach of just getting it wrong, said like, all right, It's time we be big boys about this. And they go get Jim Harbaugh. And the Patriots saw 1 year of Gerard Mayo and like, yep, that ain't it. Let's go get a big boy. Year one, the Bears spend If the Bengals are the cheapest organization in the league, the Bears are probably the second. And what do? They go out and they get Ben Johnson, the biggest name. They bring him in, give him whatever his contract is. I know it's in the tens of millions. And he has them in prime playoff. They look like legit contenders. And we know here in Cincinnati that we're not doing that. We know that it's either ride with Zach Taylor. Oh, we listen to you. You want us to fire Zach Taylor? We'll fire Zach Taylor. And you know what? We'll go get the offensive coordinator from Vanderbilt. I'm just taking jabs. I see people talking Jesse Minter. Is Jesse Minter a hot name that is brought around? Sure, but he has been a DC for 3 years now, and he's got Cincinnati connections, and maybe that name makes sense. But we just know, this team has the quarterback. We know this team has a weapon that can help them. We know, you look at the roster construction of this team, and they are in a unique position because you look at the offense and there's really not any holes. You look at the offense, and I know I'm doing this about 24 hours, less than 24 hours after they scored 0 points. But you look at that offense, and there's not going to need to be drastic changes, so you can really focus in and lean in on how to fix that defense. And still, even with the attractiveness of having Joe Burrow here in town, of having there's not coaching opportunities that open like this. It's not often that you get to coach a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson or a Joe Burrow. We saw it with Justin Herbert. Off the top of it doesn't happen often. LaFleur with Aaron Rodgers in his prime. This is an attractive landing spot to where serious coaches, accomplished coaches, would come here even with the dysfunction that this franchise creates. Even with Zach Moss, the Cincinnati Bengals legend that he is for all he did for this city, is talking about this team like they are the worst team in professional sports. Even with that, we'd be an attractive landing spot. And all you have to do is pony up a little extra cash. A little extra money that, it doesn't go in the salary cap. It's just money right out of your pocket. Spend what you want, big dog. You get big guys in here. And it's just not going to happen. It won't happen. I'll be shocked. I'll be stunned if it does. But it isn't. And we know that. And I think that's what fills the brain and fills the light at the end of the tunnel with a dark shade, because we just know it's dimmer and dimmer as we go on, and it feels like we are getting dragged further and further, not just by time dragging us further away from the Super Bowl and the AFC Championship, but further and further away from competition, because every time the Bengals take that field, you're reminded of how far we are away. And they got us believing on those Thursday. We are a wagon on Thursday Night Football, baby. They had us believing against the Steelers. They had us believing against the Ravens. But we are back to where we're in the 90s. We're not there. We're not there. But we are still that same franchise. We are still just miles behind every other team in this league that refuses to accept the modern times of you have to spend big money on a coach, you have to have a deep scouting department, front office, because this is an incredibly competitive league. To where everyone is put near the same. Everyone makes money before they sell a single ticket. We have the draft. We have the salary cap. We have free agency. There's rules in place to make this as competitive as it possibly can be. And when you are refusing to hire a GM, when you're refusing to give him the proper personnel to make the right decisions in the draft and in free agency, and when you're refusing to pay a big boy head coach, you are refusing to compete in this league. There are things you can thrift on in this life. But as we're learning, coach, front office is not one of them in the NFL. Buy a reliable car. Get you a good home. Get you nice clothes. You can buy store brand cereal. But you can't thrift on everything. And the Bengals are just continuously trying to thrift their way through this league. Stone, I promise that we let it rip here for the hour every single day. I was surprised if we were going to get this show off because of the fire alarm going off, and it was pretty apropos because it feels like there's a dumpster fire just about 30 miles south here in the Queen City.
Talk to me about the defense, Reader.
Oh, baby.
What did you think about that? Because I don't think it's necessarily a bright spot. I think they contributed to the loss there as well. But I think they were good enough for this team to be competitive in this game.
And they've played better. Like, other than the second half against the Bills, since I'd say the Pats, they played okay. Obviously, they played fantastic against the Ravens. Like, they are taking steps forward. But I still look at this defense, and I know that there is about 7 starting spots that need replaced. Both safety positions, both linebacker positions, pretty much most spots on the line. Really, it's just Miles Murphy, Juan Drago Turner, Dax Hill, and the rest of the team can be replaced. So I am slightly encouraged about the defense and how they did play well enough, I think, to put the Bengals in a position to win this game. And maybe it was just the cold weather that was pretty clearly tough to play offense in yesterday. It still doesn't excuse the nothing burger the Bengals put up there. But maybe this team isn't taking, like it feels like they are, but maybe we're just comparing them to what we're feeling for the rest, and this is just a really bad team. It's a reminder, and I always do this. It's like when you think you're watching your favorite baseball team, and throughout the year, they win games, they lose games, maybe they win 77 games, and you're looking at guys in your lineup. I'm not going to name any names, though I want to name like a bunch of Reds that you're just like, oh, those guys are a good portion. That's a good fit for our future. And then you watch the postseason and you see the lineups that like the Padres are ripping out there, or the Mets or the Rangers or the Yankees and the Red Sox or whoever's playing in the postseason. And then you are reminded of how far you are away. So yes, I am slightly encouraged by the way the defense has played over the past few weeks, sans the second half against the Bills. Like, I thought they played well enough for them to win today. I thought they played great against the Ravens the last time we played them. I thought they played well enough to win against the Patriots. I think all that's true, but maybe I'm just comparing them to the rest of the team, which I think is dog water. Maybe I'm comparing it to the coaching and the GM, and maybe I'm comparing it to the offense. Maybe it's just I'm looking at a bad team, and when a good thing happens, go, that was nice. So maybe it's just in comparison to the rest of what I'm seeing from this team, it looks better. In comparison of what I saw through the Jets week and the Bears week and the Vikings and the Broncos, to where the team looked like the worst defense I'd ever seen, where last year I called them a historically bad defense. This year it's hilariously bad. They're not that anymore, but it's still just so far away. I am encouraged by – I talked myself into this last week, and I mentioned it here on this show, that this team, I look at it, and last year we knew what they needed to do going into the offseason. They missed out by a game. They missed the postseason by a game, and the thing that held them back was their defense. So I looked at that defense, and it had to have been harder to fill the gaps, or at least focus in on what they could do with the defense, because they were also having to worry about Jamar Chase's contract, T. Higgins' contract, Joe Burrow doing national rounds saying they need to keep those guys, Trey Hendrickson's just disaster of a contract. So they had to focus on those things. This year, I look at the offensive line, and it looks mostly ready to go. And I look at Chase Brown and Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Mike Gesicki and Noah Fant and all these pieces, and it looks mostly ready to go. Maybe you have to go get a backup quarterback. I look at the defense, and really the only thing they got to focus on this offseason is how the hell do you fix this defense? And we've talked about, they probably got to fix. There's 3 spots on the defense that are locked in. Myles Murphy's going to be here next year. DJ Turner's going to be here. Dax Turner's likely going to be here. Is going to be here next year. Really, the rest of the defense, there's no one that spot is here, and you can, because it's the only thing you got to do, can focus in on that, and that makes me a little more optimistic to where they can streamline their focus. But as I'll sum up the show here, because we got to get the Stone Shield show. We've got a few minutes over, and I appreciate everyone that's here. Thank you for, if you can give us a like and subscribe, that'd be fantastic. We'll have more Bengals content all week. Maybe you don't want to hear it. I came to the realization on that 4-game losing streak. We start 2-0. Joe Burrow gets hurt. We saw what Jake Browning could do 2 years ago, and you're optimistic that it's not going to be good. It's not going to be pretty. You got a tough road ahead. You got to play the Vikings and the Packers and the Broncos. Like, those are all good teams, as we know now. Sans the Vikings. And you see those 4 games, and the team looked like the worst team in football. They straight up quit in the second half against the Vikings. They straight up quit in the second half against the Broncos. They weren't competitive against the Packers. They showed fight against the Lions, but just were outclassed, punch for punch. Shouldn't have even been in the ring. And I came to the realization then that I've walked off of, that this team was the worst team in the league without Joe Burrow. And they get Joe Flacco and things look better. Right? They look a little better. They win that game against the Steelers. I'm all the way back in. And then they lose just hilariously like they did against the Jets, who are the worst team in the league. And then lose to the Bears, who are great, but had the chance to win. It took a 57-yard touchdown with 30 seconds to go by a tight end. Oh, what a surprise there. And you get right back to, this team without Joe Burrow is one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league. And Joe Burrow is amazing. He's fantastic. He's the best quarterback I think this franchise has ever seen. And he may be the best quarterback in the league, and that's coming off a 0-point performance yesterday. But the rest of the team, from who operates it, who picks the players that show up on the roster, the de facto GM, from the head coaching to the defensive coordinator to the defense and everything in between, this team has so many deficiencies, and Joe Burrow is not good enough, no longer good enough here now that he's getting $60 million, $55 million a year, and we can't spend more money. Now that we're in that situation, he's not good enough to overcome the rest of the deficiencies. And I just pray that the Bengals, if they do go the route as I think they should, to move on from Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin, that they do it as a franchise in the modern era that's going to spend tens of millions of dollars on a coach and high dollar for an up-and-coming GM, and I can't even begin to list the names of who that would be. But I just pray if they go that way, they don't do what they've always done, which is cut the corners, which is close the gates and not clear off the snow from the seats, as they did yesterday, which was encapsulates, said that word wrong, everything that this Bengals team is. Guys, thank you so much for being here. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. The Stone Shield Show coming up for the next hour. I'll see you guys. This is Reed Mouse off the bench.
Here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. My name is Stone Shields. Appreciate everybody hanging out through Off the Bench into the 11 o'clock hour of programming here at Chatterbox Sports. Another week here at Chatterbox. Certainly lots of exciting stuff we got to talk about. Unfortunately, not a great week in the city of Cincinnati as the Bengals get shut out, and that kind of puts a cherry on top for what, in my lifetime, is the most disappointing season in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals. Came in with Super Bowl expectations, Super Bowl aspirations, and only have a handful of wins here as they are officially eliminated from postseason contention on December 14th yesterday. And just the state of the AFC in general, but particularly the state of the AFC North, makes this really, really, really tough to swallow. So we'll unpack the game. There's lots to discuss. I think this is Joe Burrow's one of his worst games of his career. My opinion, the worst game I remember him playing since the Week 1 game against the Patriots last year. He's had a couple of other bad performances, but this is pretty much near the top of the list, as that was not good enough to get the job done. And he said at his press conference yesterday, yeah, not many teams are going to win. Nobody in the NFL is going to win with me playing quarterback yesterday. So we're going to unpack what Joe Burrow had to say after the game. We're going to unpack what went wrong for the Cincinnati Bengals as well. We're going to talk Zach Taylor, as we always do. He's responsible for a team that went out there and put up no points. That is unacceptable, so we'll talk about him. We'll talk about the defense, who allowed the Bengals to potentially be competitive in this game, but ultimately were not good enough. We'll talk about the run game. We'll talk about the weather. We'll talk about the organization not clearing off the seats. We'll talk about them shutting down some gates, not allowing people to necessarily get into the game on time. So lots to break down as it relates to the Cincinnati Bengals, but really does put a cherry on top what has been a disaster of a year for the Cincinnati Bengals. Rough weekend for the Bearcats as well as they lose to Georgia. That game was played in Atlanta. Came out great start, right? Bob Miller kind of had the team going. They had a lead, and they were building on that lead, and then all of a sudden you look up at halftime, and it's tied, and it kind of felt like, uh-oh, this thing is slipping out of the grasps of the Bearcats' hands here pretty quickly. Second half was abysmal. Had a chance to stick around, maybe cover the number late, and it certainly looked like Wes Miller's team quit on him at the end of that ball game. So we'll break down a little bit what went wrong with the Cincinnati Bearcats. They are a complete mess. Don't necessarily think the Bengals quit on Sunday. Cincinnati Bearcats definitely did the day prior to that. So we'll discuss that. Again, we'll talk about potential changes coming for the Cincinnati Bengals, whether that be coaching changes, personnel changes, or changes within the front office there as well. Also, we'll talk about some brutal injuries in the NFL yesterday. Patrick Mahomes, he tears his ACL. Not good. Chiefs eliminated from postseason contention. Can't believe we're saying that out loud. And then Micah Parsons, I don't know if his ACL is confirmed, but I believe that is what people are thinking is going to happen with Micah Parsons. It's going to be an ACL for him, and that is a huge hit to the Green Bay Packers, who, of course, gave a lot of their salary cap to him and certainly gave up a lot of draft compensation for him as well. We'll talk about those two injuries. Then we'll go around the NFL a little bit to close out our show. The Bills come roaring back, beat the Patriots. They might be a team in a weak AFC that really can take control of this conference. The Texans, they stay hot. How about Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars? They went off. Liam Cohen, rookie head coach. You know, how about getting a head coach in there and knows what he's doing? Looks pretty good for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Rams stay hot. They beat the Lions. Browns get shellacked by Green Bay. And old Phillip Rivers went out there and he played solid in the game. Didn't play great by any stretch, but for a guy that hadn't played in years and years, was 44 years of age against that defense in Seattle, I think it went pretty well for Indianapolis, but ultimately they come up a little bit short, lose that game to Seattle on the road. So we'll go around the NFL a little bit to conclude today's show. But let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. They lose 24-0, and I want to, before we dive into the game fully, I do want to talk about some of the other storylines that are going around the organization right now. One of which was that they did not clear the snow off the seats. And look, this didn't really rub me the wrong way. But, you know, the national media loves piling on the Cincinnati Bengals, and rightfully so. You saw former Bengal Zach Moss put out a tweet basically saying it's one of the worst, if not the worst, organizations in all of sports. So that's kind of why I had an issue with it, because it's just another thing for people to make fun of the Bengals for, right? If this was, you know, a different organization, or if the Bengals were winning this year, if you spin their record around and they're in control of the AFC North, no one's really talking about this. But when you couple it with Burrow's comments at the press conference, which he addressed after the game, we'll talk about that a little bit there as well. But the national media kind of took it and ran with it. They're so far removed from what goes on in these press conferences, really, so much more removed than the media members that cover this team locally, and they had a narrative and they they ran with it, and it went viral all over the place, all over the talk shows. We certainly talked about it there as well. But that's just kind of something for those people to pile on for the Cincinnati Bengals, right? Oh, you had this quarterback, he's unhappy, you failed him, and you can't even brush off your seats to help your fans in. I was a little bit more frustrated with shutting down some of the gates to get into the stadium. Not all the gates were operational, and that caused people to not get into the game until halfway through the first quarter, or even at the end of the first quarter. And some of that's on the fans, right, for sitting there going, well, it's pretty cold. I want to stay in my shelter. I want to stay in my warmth for as long as possible, and then kind of push this and, try to get in right when the game starts. And then when you have some gates that are shut down, ultimately that can't end up happening. And again, just a bad reflection on the organization. If this is a team that has a winning season, right, or if this is happening to a different organization that doesn't get made fun of as much as the Cincinnati Bengals, not really much of a story. But when you have a team that has fallen woefully short of your expectations, when you have a quarterback that seems pretty unhappy, borderline depressed at his press conference, you get shut out 24-0, and you have issues about not brushing off your seats and shutting some gates down, it is just a horrible, horrible look for the organization. As I mentioned, it gets capped with a 24-0 shellacking on the football field as well. So I wouldn't say I was ticked off about it, right? They had literally one guy that was blowing off some seats in the club section, right? They could have used a few more of those guys. The Bengals came out and said, yeah, we were more worried about the walkways than the seats or whatever. Again, if the Bengals are winning games, right, if they're competing for the AFC North title, right, or if it's a different organization that doesn't get drugged through the mud like the Cincinnati Bengals, it's not much of a story, but it's just more fuel to the fire as far as, national people and even certainly us, local people that talk about this team and how they're kind of an embarrassment right now, and that's just kind of the reality of the situation. But at the end of the day, nothing is more embarrassing than losing 24-0 to the Baltimore Ravens. And there's a lot of things that went into this loss for the Cincinnati Bengals, right? And I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me is I haven't seen Joe Burrow play like that in a really long time. I said at the top, I think it kind of reminded me of like week 1 against the New England Patriots, where he didn't look right and he was being inaccurate with some of his throws. And we kind of speculated how the weather would impact this game. We talked about, are there going to be some receivers dropping some balls? Yes, that certainly was the case in the game yesterday. But at the end of the day, Joe Burrow's got to play better, and he understands that. The first drive, right, you're kind of putting together a drive, lots of plays, picking up some momentum, getting some yardage, getting into Baltimore territory, picking up a first down, what have you. And all of a sudden you take a 15-yard sack on third down when you're in field goal range, right? Now, Joe Burrow has been known to take a sack or two when he's trying to extend the play, whether it be third or fourth down, right? But you can't do that when you're in field goal range, especially just understanding the conditions of that game. The Bengals and the Ravens famously have gotten into a lot of shootouts over the years, but you walk into that stadium, you understand the conditions there, how cold it is. You realize, okay, it's going to be a little bit different of a style here in this game between the Bengals and the Ravens. That 3 points there would have given you the lead. Right? Obviously, he didn't have a lead the whole game because he didn't score any points. But taking a sack like that, that's not something that Joe Burrow does. Right? That is a rookie quarterback type of mistake. That's something, a J.J. McCarthy would do. He played well last night. Give him credit for that. But just a rookie quarterback that's in over his head, that's kind of a mistake that they would make. Not the guy that we call the best quarterback in the National Football League. Inexcusable. Unacceptable. Now, he had a free rusher coming. He mentioned after the game, I think he probably put him in a wrong call, made the wrong check at the line of scrimmage. But again, that's Joe Burrow's superpower. He's got several superpowers, right? His ability on third and fourth down, his escapability, his accuracy, right? But I think it all stems from him being brilliant at the line of scrimmage and getting into that look where he had a free rusher coming right at his face. Not good to take a sack there in that situation. I don't know really if he had much of a choice, because if he throws it away, it's probably going to be intentional grounding because he was in the box. I mean, this guy was coming right at his face, full steam ahead immediately from getting the ball. So I think he just put him in a bad spot there. Again, a situation and a decision that Joe Burrow does not make, and we're not used to seeing him making. And, it's early in the game when that happens. You not think much about it, but you had some positive momentum. You were picking up some first downs on that drive, and ultimately your quarterback cost you points or cost you a field goal attempt from Evan McPherson. So that was one. And then just general inaccuracy that you saw from Burrow throughout the course of this game. Again, talk about his superpower being at the line of scrimmage. Well, it's his other superpower, his accuracy. And I think it's probably fair to say, not an excuse, but fair to say that the temperatures and the conditions at Paycor Stadium on Sunday certainly factored into his inability to be accurate with the football. And just a couple where it's like, oh, that was a little bit behind him. Oh, that's not a great ball there. Or that was a little late even. You saw that. Or it's like he had Jamar over the middle of the field, and then he's kind of, he looks at him, but he doesn't go to him right away, looks elsewhere, nothing's there, then tries to go back to Jamar. It's too late, and it's behind him. Like just uncharacteristic stuff that you saw from Joe Burrow in this game. He's always playing in timing, playing with great timing, playing with great rhythm, hitting his back foot, reading it out, and letting it rip. And you saw him be a little bit hesitant in the game, I thought. And I think that certainly factored into some of his inaccuracy when he was throwing the football down the field. And then you also had 2 interceptions again, right? And, you had a couple of times you never really were in striking distance, like in the red zone, like on the precipice of scoring, right? But you had it in scoring range, right? Past the 50, kind of around that 30-yard line for the Baltimore Ravens. You were there on separate multiple occasions, and you come away with no points. You had the sack, as we alluded to on the first drive, and then the interception as well, where it's like, okay, the Bengals are going to take control of this game, get some points on the board, really put some pressure on the Baltimore Ravens. And it's a bad ball from Joe Burrow. I think Jamar would say, he could have caught it. He certainly could have. I think he probably snatches it out of thin air if the conditions were optimal, but his hands are frozen. That ball is frozen. It glanced off the top of his fingertips and ultimately gets intercepted. Huge play in the game. It's a miss from Joe Burrow. Some of the stuff was a little bit fluky last week, the 2 interceptions. That was a miss. And when you're going over the middle of the field and you miss high, it's getting picked off in the National Football League, especially against the Baltimore Ravens. So that was a huge mistake from Burrow in the game. And then, of course, you fast forward to the fourth quarter. And, it was 17-0 at that point. We'll talk about Zach in a second. I think, everybody, of course, was talking about this. So it's like you're down 3 scores, and you're sitting here huddling up and not really playing with much urgency at all, almost like you just kind of want to score and just get points on the board, but ultimately don't think you're going to win the game. Didn't love that. I still think that if the Bengals score on that drive before the pick 6, they find a way to get back in the game. They don't win the game, right? There's, 10 minutes left. It would have been 17-7. But I feel like they end up making it a 1-score game after that. Defense had played okay. Again, we'll touch on the defense in a second. But just a massive mistake there from Joe Burrow. Dylan Fairchild completely whiffs on the play as his guy just walks right past him, right into the face of Joe Burrow, and then Burrow panics and just kind of floats it over the middle of the field, and it gets picked off. And I literally, that's one of the worst Joe Burrow interceptions that we've seen, to be honest with you. And again, didn't get much help from Dylan Fairchild at all. He had a guy barreling down on his face. It was 3rd down, and he just kind of panics and just floats it over the middle of the field, right? I mean, you want to float it up into the end zone, the route that's in the end zone, that's one thing, but just kind of throw it in the middle of the field. I don't even know who he was throwing it to. That's one of his superpowers. Again, is just having that poise in the pocket and not panicking, even with guys in his face. He flat out panicked in that situation. I can't remember the last time I've seen Joe Burrow panic with pressure in his face. And it looked kind of, when you're watching it back, kind of looked like he twisted his ankle, and you were like, oh, goodness, are we worried about, him potentially getting hurt here in this situation? Baltimore, Van Noy picks it off, gets it to his buddy. They house it, and everybody files for the exits if they had not already gone to the exits there already. But those are a few plays where it's just like, okay, this is the guy that we hold to a high standard. Again, is this the worst game in NFL history? No, right? But you're comparing it to a guy that I believe is the best quarterback in the National Football League. When the best quarterback in the National Football League goes out there, scores 0 points, and throws 2 interceptions, that's about as bad as it gets when you hold him to that standard. And I think, if we're going to sit here and talk about Joe Burrow being one of the best of all time, being one of the best in the league, perhaps the best in the league, you have to hold him to that standard on a week-in, week-out basis, regardless of the conditions. And he fell woefully short for the Cincinnati Bengals in this game. Receivers didn't help him out. All right, now when you look at the stat sheet, it's like, Jamar, another game over 100 yards. Okay, he had a couple of drops, right? One certainly contributed directly to the interception. Got to be a better ball from Burrow, but that was a bad play by Jamar Chase. Had another drop as well. Yoshi had a drop in the game. Mitchell Tinsley had a drop in the game. He had the illegal procedure penalty as well. And, Gesicki had a drop. So there was guys that had opportunities with the football in their hands to make a play. And in these elements, in these conditions, especially when you're behind and you're dropping footballs in the NFL, it's not going to work out very well. And one of my takeaways also from this game is I get there's bigger fish to fry, but I'm a little bit worried about the back end of this Bengals wide receiver room. Now, I don't think it should be addressed, right, because there's so many issues that you need to address, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's like, well, the interior of the offensive line, do we feel good about those guys, or is that just, a one-off, a bad week? Maybe. Of course, the entirety of the defense has to be addressed, but it's like, Tinsley, that's a couple of drops that he's now had. Some mental mistakes there. Yoshi, he continues to have a lot of drops as well. And it's like, well, Charlie, they don't really trust him out there running around. It's like, how good do you feel about the back end of this receiver room, especially if T. Higgins is going to continue to struggle with injuries? Just kind of a side tangent there. I don't think you need to address it. Again, you got much bigger fish to fry, but that couldn't help but creep into my mind a little bit watching those guys out there. Receivers did not play well. They didn't get open a lot, too. Joe Burrow had some misses, but if you're watching that game, and the Yoshi wasn't getting open, Tinsley wasn't getting open out there either. So credit to Baltimore there for that. I do think the Ravens handled the conditions a little bit better in this game. I think they understood what their plan was going in, and the Bengals, I think for them to win, they got to sling it around. But in these conditions, it's very, very difficult. And we speculated that dropping balls might be an issue for this team in this game, and it was. Not the direct reason you lost, but certainly a contributing factor to it. And Jamar, you look at the stat sheet, solid game, but did he really do much for you down the field? No. And he had a couple of drops as well. And certainly DJ Turner had an opportunity to make an interception, and he was not able to haul it in either. Frozen football, frigid temperatures, I understand that. Ravens ultimately ended up making more plays than the Cincinnati Bengals. When you talk about the run game for Cincinnati, wasn't great, but good enough, right? I mean, I think the way I look at this game, it's like the run game, running the football, not great, good enough to be competitive. Defense, not great, good enough to be competitive. You look up at the scoreboard, you lose 24-0, right? That's an indictment on your quarterback. It's an indictment on the play caller as well. And, I think defensively for the Cincinnati Bengals showed some signs of improvement, I would say. Certainly better than they were against Buffalo. It's going to be, week to week when you're doing this on a Monday, like it's not going to be linear, right, as far as progression of a defense. Took a step in the wrong direction against Buffalo, probably took a step in the right direction here against Baltimore, but by no means good enough. And not even close. And we had a whole segment that we did last week about how, the Bengals defense maybe wasn't as horrible as it had been earlier in the season in the game against Buffalo, but in all the critical moments, they were really, really bad. The fourth downs, right? Well, the drive that really swung this game in Baltimore's favor is the final drive for the first half, where they go down the field in 1 minute, literally a minute, and score a touchdown. And you give up some chunk plays if you're the Cincinnati Bengals defense, right? And then the play over the top. The pass rush doesn't come close to getting home. Well, Lamar Jackson, he only sent 4 on the play, and then DJ Turner should have had help behind him from Geno Stone, and Geno Stone was late getting over there, and he let Zay Flowers get behind him in the end zone. Was a dime from Lamar Jackson, but to me, I'm watching that play, and I'm going, that's Geno Stone doing Geno Stone things, and he still is out on the field each and every play for the Cincinnati Bengals. I do not get it. I do not understand it. I thought some guys showed some improvement there defensively, but Geno Stone is one guy that continues to be a bad football player for this team, and they continue to roll him out there and let him play. I don't understand it. That, to me, I mentioned this last week, there's a lot of things that are frustrating about this team, but I'm going to be honest, I think the number one thing for me is that we all sat here and said, you got to address the safety position. You got to do something. You got to draft somebody. You got to bring in a free agent. You got to trade for somebody. You have to do something at that position. And the Bengals sat on their hands and said, we're good. It was horrible last year, but we'll just run it back and we'll be all right. It's horrible again. It is horrible once again for this team. And it is really, really difficult for me to wrap my head around how you do not address the safety position. Myles Murphy had some moments, of course. The 2 sacks. We can talk as time goes on about picking up his 5th-year option. The touchdown they gave up on the screen pass, that was, Myles Murphy. That was his guy, and he went by him to try to get to the quarterback. Lamar gets him the ball, and the rest was kind of history. I don't know what the coaching point there is on that play. I don't know if Myles Murphy did the right thing, but his guy walked right by him, and, ultimately the screen pass is completed, and the Ravens get on the board and strike first in that game. But, he had the 2 sacks. Had some pressures, was getting in the backfield some, so I think you would have to say that Myles Murphy continues to make some improvement here. If there's one positive thing, again, I'm not trying to say that the Bengals need to bring back these linebackers because I would like them both to be not starters for the Cincinnati Bengals next year, but I think that was probably Demetrius Knight's best game as Cincinnati Bengal. Probably the best game of his career to this point. Had the 2 sacks, was in the backfield. From a missed tackle perspective, I thought we would see more from Cincinnati, honestly, going into this game, especially in those conditions. But from a tackling perspective, I thought, they performed decently there in that game. But the Ravens clearly had a plan that they wanted to stick to, where it's like, we're going to run the ball, and we're going to play defense here in this game, and, hopefully this clock kind of rolls pretty quickly. And, I would think the Ravens wanted to dominate the time of possession battle by running the ball. That's not how it swung out. The Bengals dominated the time of possession. I think the Ravens had the ball for like 20 minutes in this game. Something absurd, right? But they had a plan. They stuck to it. Derrick Henry, he only had 11 carries, but they were very productive. And it was an average of over 9 per carry. That's getting it done. Their backup was able to run the ball as well. And they basically won this game with defense and running the football. And they didn't ask Lamar to do too much. I mean, Lamar didn't, as the quarterback out there, I don't even remember one play other than the touchdown at the end of the first half where it's Lamar, made a play. He was 8 of 12 throwing the football, and he only ran it twice. Lamar really did nothing in this game for the Baltimore Ravens, and it still was plenty to beat the Cincinnati Bengals. So credit to them. They had a better plan coming in. They executed it. And, they were able to play defense and run the ball and ultimately score more points than the Cincinnati Bengals, because the Bengals, of course, did not score any points in this football game. As far as the plan from Zach, I think they kind of went in and said, you know what, we're just going to play football. It's going to be cold, but we're just going to play our game. And, I think that probably in hindsight wasn't the right plan to have. I get having Joe Burrow, regardless of the conditions, you got to throw it around, but I don't know. I mean, you had several drops in the game. You had some opportunities to make something happen. I think the weather probably affected it. It's no excuse, but I do kind of question a little bit what that plan was coming in. You have to, right? You absolutely have to question the plan when a team goes out there and scores no points. I understand Burrow played bad, right? I understand the defense still did some bad things throughout the course of the game, but if you go out there and score 0 points, everybody on that offense and everybody on the offensive coaching staff and, of course, Zach Taylor need to be held accountable. Again, it's not like they went out there and scored 7 points or 10 points. The Bengals went out there on Sunday and did not score a single point. That is absolutely unacceptable. Borderline fireable offense. Not going to say it, but I think there's some people out there, especially with the season that has gone on to this point, and you go out there and put a nothing burger on the line, right, with your last gasp hope to try to make a Hail Mary push into the postseason, and you score 0 points. That's a fireable offense in a lot of people's eyes. Right? So everybody on that offense needs to be held accountable. And I think there was a lot of, there were some penalties in the game, some procedural stuff. You had a holding on Orlando Brown. You had the illegal procedure on Mitchell Tinsley, right? You had penalties on Fairchild. Fairchild did not play well at all in this game for the Cincinnati Bengals. It just wasn't buttoned up enough, and they scored no points in the game. They scored 0 points in the football game, and ultimately that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable for the Cincinnati Bengals. Baltimore didn't do much. They understood the elements a little bit more. They understood the conditions. They played to it. They played to their strengths, and it was enough to win the game. It was enough to win the game for the Baltimore Ravens. But we'll see how Cincinnati goes from here as we kind of transition this conversation a little bit to looking forward for this team, right? Because they're eliminated from the postseason. That obviously is not good. Now, some people, look, if the Bengals continue to lose, I don't think it's the end of the world because you get the higher draft pick, right? I'm not one of those guys that say, tank for a higher pick. They need to be going out there and trying to win these final 3 games, right? But it's not the worst thing in the world if they don't. To me, the evaluation process over the course of these next 3 weeks is really significant. Again, Bengals played bad, obviously, in the game yesterday. Don't think they quit. And, say what you want about Zach Taylor, but if your team's not quitting on him, that's positive, right? If there's one positive thing, it's that the Cincinnati Bengals have not quit. Plenty of opportunity to quit here over the course of the next 3 weeks. And if they do, right, that could be, the last straw for Zach Taylor. It might be time for him to move on and the Bengals to head in a different direction. But a lot of people say, these next 3 games, they don't mean nothing, whatever. These next 3 games are huge for a lot of players in that locker room, and they are huge for a lot of coaches, including Zach Taylor. And, I would argue they're huge for a lot of people in the front office too, but we'll see if ultimately a change is made at the very, very top as far as Duke Tobin or, any of the scouts or whatever behind the scenes from a football, operations standpoint here. A lot of people would say that, Joe shouldn't play the remaining 3 games. My stance on this has not changed, right? It was inevitable that the Bengals would eventually be eliminated from the postseason. Right? And people are saying, why is Joe rushing back here to play on Thanksgiving? And we're all frustrated about it. And my mindset was, at some point they're going to be a meaningless football game. Right? And I still thought it was the right thing to do that he goes out there and plays in those football games. Now, I think he should sit against the Cleveland Browns. Right? I think he should play the next 2 weeks, play the Miami game, play the Arizona game, hopefully get some, valuable reps under his belt, hopefully play some good football, hopefully get some wins. And then I think the last game against Cleveland, right, I get it's at home, but, nothing to play for. You lose, you get a better pick, and Myles Garrett's on the other side. Yeah, no thanks. I'll sit Joe for the last game, and honestly, I would sit T the rest of the way, right? I said that last week, that if the Bengals come in and are eliminated from the postseason, T. Higgins should sit after all these concussions. He's had several here in the past few weeks. The last thing you want him to do is get another one when you're playing meaningless football. So I would sit T the rest of the year. Again, I don't think Cincinnati probably will do that. I think they'll probably roll him out there for one of these games. But I would sit him, and I would sit Joe the final game against Cleveland, and probably sit Jamar as well in that game as well. So just sit those two guys out against Cleveland, but certainly play them over the course of these next 2 weeks. And then from an evaluation perspective, how's this team going to play, right? Are they going to show up with a lot to prove? Show up like they're fighting for their job? Show up like they're coaching for their job? Or are they going to show up for Zach Taylor? Right? I think that is critical here over the course of the next few weeks, because if a team quits, I don't think you can undo that. I don't think you can come back from that, to be honest. And I'll give them credit. They didn't quit in the game yesterday, had opportunities to, but again, they weren't mathematically eliminated from the postseason. Now they are. What's that effort level going to look like for the Cincinnati Bengals here going forward? So it's critical for Zach over the course of these next few weeks. I've been a supporter of Zach Taylor. I don't have blinders on, right? I understand he's not Andy Reid, right? I understand he's not Kyle Shanahan, but for the most part, I've sat here and said, that he needs to continue to be evaluated throughout the rest of the year, but I would bring him back. There's a chance that changes, how things transpire over the course of the next 3 games, right? Because you scored 0 points. Right, that's unacceptable. That is as bad as it gets. You went out there, played 60 minutes of football on your home field against a division rival, and you scored 0 points in the game. That cannot happen. And to me, that's 2 people that deserve the most blame. That's Zach Taylor, and that's Joe Burrow. So we'll see how he continues to be evaluated here. And then you got to evaluate all your guys from a personnel standpoint on defense, and evaluate all your guys from an offensive line perspective as well. It's not going to look great each and every week. Right, I mentioned earlier it's not going to be linear, right? But, I think there were some people that thought, this offensive line could be the offensive line next year. Well, is that going to be the case? Do you trust those guys at the guard spot? Do you trust Orlando Brown Jr., despite the fact you're paying him so much money to be your left tackle, right? So those guys are going to continue to be evaluated. And then everybody on the defense, right? DJ Turner had an off game in this one, but I think he deserves an extension. He obviously should be back with this football team. And Myles Murphy, we can talk about picking up his 5th-year option. We'll see going forward. I don't really have an opinion yet because it was so bad for so long, but all of a sudden there's some positivity. I bet they probably will pick it up, but we can have that conversation at a later date. Dax, what do you do with him? I think he can be a starter for a solid defense, but he's not a star by any stretch of the imagination. Doesn't look like a first-round pick by any stretch of the imagination. Then what do you do with those linebacker spots? Conversations that are going to continue to be had for this team. And it's unfortunate that they can't play complementary football. They asked Joe that after the game, and it's like, when you go back and look at this season and break through it, it's like, well, the defense wasn't horrible in that game, but offense wasn't good enough. And it's like, well, the offense wasn't horrible in that game, but the defense wasn't good enough. Like, literally, they have not played complementary football one time. One time. I mean, you could argue the Thanksgiving game was the only time they've played complementary football, right? And that phrase gets thrown out a lot, and people go, oh, complementary football. It's true. Like, this Bengals team, when their defense is good enough, their offense no-shows, and when their offense is good enough, their defense no-shows. Literally, the Thanksgiving game against the Baltimore Ravens is the only game where they played solid on both sides or good enough to win on both sides. And I don't know if it's just a bad luck thing or what, but clearly that needs to get addressed in some form. And one more thing I will say about Zach is this. I think there is a notion out there that this thing can't get any worse. And I've got news. It can. And it can get a heck of a lot worse. Take a look at the Las Vegas Raiders right now. Take a look at the New York Jets right now. And I think that needs to be taken into account before deciding that, okay, you know what, this team needs to move off of Zach Taylor. Because I've said this multiple times. Oh, it's all great. Yeah, move off Zach Taylor, and if the Steelers fire Mike Tomlin, go get Mike Tomlin. You got to pay him a heck of a lot more than you're going to pay your head coach, right? And, maybe the Bengals will adjust. We've seen them do some things out of character here recently. The big money contract, of course, they gave to Joe Burrow, that was not Bengal-like. That was out of character. Paying both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, that was not Bengal-like. That was out of character. So maybe they'll do something that's out of character and not Bengal-like and pay some head coach to come in here and pay him over $10 million. I don't think that's going to happen, to be completely honest with you. I really, really don't. I really, really don't. And there is a world where they move off Zach Taylor, bring in some other guy that's an unproven guy, only going to pay him $4 million, and this thing could, believe it or not, get worse, right? Because if you're going to bring in another head coach, chances are it's going to be a guy that hasn't been a head coach before, and you're kind of rolling the dice on him, right? And then you have a new vision with him coming in, but a lot of the same core guys. So there's a lot of issues that could come with replacing Zach Taylor. I understand it hasn't been good enough. I understand it hasn't been close, but understand that this is not the bottom of the barrel. It can get a heck of a lot worse for this team. Take a look at what's going on in New York. Take a look at what's going on in Las Vegas. I will have a take when the year is said and done about what I think they should do at the coordinator positions, from a front office perspective and a head coach perspective. I will say right now, I am not pulled one way or the other. I don't think they 100% should fire him, and I don't think he should 100% come back. I think these next 3 games are very, very big for Zach Taylor, how the team plays, the effort in which they show, and just the overall execution of the team. Because if you go out there and you score 0 points, I've said this multiple times, I'm going to continue to say it, that is as bad as it gets for the Cincinnati Bengals. If you are a professional football team and you go out there and you do not score, the head coach has got to be on the hot seat and the quarterback's got to be getting drugged through the mud, because that just cannot happen. There was opportunities for them to make this game against Baltimore close, right, to hang in there. And, again, you're driving down the football field, and you're thinking, okay, you're going to score here. It's going to be 17-7. You're probably still going to lose, but you can at least make it interesting, at least give the fans some reason that we're still there to stick around a little bit in the fourth quarter. And ultimately that did not end up transpiring late in that football game. And there was some other stuff that, continues to rear its ugly head, the timeout usage, right? Is that a Joe thing? Is it a Zach thing? Is it a combination? Right? In the first half, you're burning timeouts, right? That continues to be an issue for this team, right? And there was one instance where, the Bengals were down 3 scores. It was the third quarter. It was very at the end of the third quarter, and they were in their own territory, but it was a, fourth and manageable, and they opted to punt the football. Technically, it worked because they forced a punt right back on defense, but from a decision-making perspective, I think that's the one thing that you could, come at Zach for a little bit there. I think, he probably, certainly would go out there with his offense and try to pick up the first down. You'd see that decision be made in previous weeks. Maybe the weather factored into that. Obviously, they didn't score any points in the game leading up to that point, so maybe he's like, the defense is playing solid. Let's try to flip field position a little bit here, but I don't love kicking the ball to Lamar Jackson down 3 scores with about 15 minutes to go in the ball game. I don't love that, but that was kind of from the one decision-making perspective, the one thing that I didn't love. Again, ran the ball good enough to win, but did not run the ball great by any stretch. Very mediocre in the run game, but not bad, right? And ultimately, the quarterback did not play well enough. The receivers did not catch the ball well enough. And then the defense made some timely errors in the game. And look, we've said this several times. I've said this several times throughout the year. The Bengals, where they're at as a team, there's many things that contributed to this loss. But if they throw a pick 6, you can pretty much chalk it up as a loss, right? Not saying that is the reason why Cincinnati lost, because Joe Burrow threw a pick 6 down 3 scores. No. But all the holes that this team has, if you look at the stat sheet and it's like, oh, there's an interception return for a touchdown for the opposition, Bengals aren't winning the game. They're just not good enough to do it here at this point. We'll continue to unpack things throughout the course of the week. We'll continue to talk about Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow going forward. One more thing I will say about Joe is you kind of wonder if some of the comments that he had during his press conference during the week, did that get him sidetracked maybe for this game? Look, Joe Burrow, again, we're talking about his superpowers. One of them is that he can compartmentalize and that he can focus at the task at hand. But he's also human. You got to wonder if that kind of factored into things a little bit here in this game. Just speculation. I don't think it probably did. I think, to be honest with you, it's probably the sub-zero temperatures. And that's an excuse, but I think it's kind of a legitimate one for the Cincinnati Bengals. It's cold, and the Baltimore Ravens handled it a lot better. But I think, Joe, if there's one positive that you can take away, there's a handful if you want to be Mr. Optimistic here. One is that Demetrius Knight played solid, right? Maybe there's something there. It's one game, but it's like, okay, we saw something there from Demetrius Knight. And the one other thing is that, okay, Joe Burrow kind of cleared up his comments. Again, the national media kind of ran with that narrative he said after the game, and he kind of went out of his way to say it. And I thought that was particularly noteworthy, where he was like, yeah, my comments had nothing to do with the city of Cincinnati. It was just about being frustrated with football and obviously losing. Losing is unacceptable, right? Joe Burrow, right? I mean, he is just a psycho competitor football player. And I get that he's been hurt several times, and we speculated that could he, perhaps step away. It's like, based on how he's talking, it kind of seems like that. But this is Joe Burrow. He's a crazy competitor, and I wouldn't expect that to happen in the near future. And he's not going to ask out of Cincinnati either, and he made that very clear after the game, which I think should settle down a lot of people. So, okay, this team might stink. This organization might be an embarrassment, but the quarterback is still going to be around for several years here at this point. And I do like how he took some ownership after the game. I think sometimes, like, Joe will play really well and then make a mistake late, and ultimately the team can't overcome that. And he's been hesitant at times to say, like, well, if I don't make that mistake, we win. He took full ownership, and I appreciate that because, again, we're sitting here talking about it like it's one of the worst performances of all time. It's not, but it's one of the worst performances of his career, and we hold him at such a high standard. He needs to play up to that standard if we're going to continue to say and talk about him like he's one of the best players in the sport and in this game. So I like the accountability he showed after the game, and apparently he addressed the team after the game as well. Be interested, would love to be a fly on the wall there on that conversation. They kept it private. They asked players about it afterwards. They didn't really comment. But, yeah, I would love to hear what he had to say. If it was just him kind of taking ownership for the loss or if there was more big picture stuff there. But at the end of the day, the Bengals, they're eliminated from the postseason, but there's a lot to play for this team over the course of the next few weeks because there's not a lot of certainties, right? Joe's going to be back. Jamar's going to be back. T's going to be back. The guys under contract that have performed well are going to be back, but there's a lot of question marks about where this team goes in 2026, and they've got to get this thing turned around fast. One thing that I will push back with Joe about, I respect him for answering the question the way he did, but they basically said, how far away, does it feel like you are from playoff aspirations, championship aspirations? And he said not far, which I respect him for saying that, but as a fan and someone that has watched all year, feels like they are a long way away from that. And just remember, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, these guys are going to continue to get older, right? I mean, we are going into 2026. They're not playing baseball here. They're playing a violent game, playing football. Joe was drafted in 2020. Next time you blink, it's going to be 2030. And if this thing's still a mess, then he might be gone at that point, number one. But bottom line is you gotta get a sense of urgency here if you're this organization. Because I've said it multiple times, if you can't win with Joe Burrow, then you will never win if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. Got to find ways to fix this. Keep your fingers crossed that he can stay healthy. Changes need to be made because we talked about how important it was for them not punting on the season when Joe Burrow went down, just because how accessible the division was and just how what your expectations were coming into the year. Well, going into 2026, that sense of urgency has to be heightened even more if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, because you have a franchise player in place. You have a star wide receiver. There is no reason that you should not be a playoff team, maybe not Super Bowl team, but a playoff team each and every year. And you look up, and now it's 3 years in a row that you haven't been in the playoffs, and this year wasn't even close, if we're being completely honest. Lots needs to change, and we'll see if the organization is capable of doing that over the course of the next few weeks. All right. Looks like we have a super chat or two here. Yes, we do. From Ben Riley, he sent in a couple, and C. Melly a $20 super chat. This is this is great. C. Melly says, Stone, thanks for always waving at me through the window. Hope you have wonderful holidays. Maybe we will both get a present and get Geno Stone off the field. His lack of effort on tackling is team killer. Yes, absolutely. Appreciate all of our super chats here on the show. Appreciate you, C. Melly. Always good to see you walk by our studio here at Chatterbox and give me a wave. We appreciate the $20 super chat. I totally agree. Right? So if there's one player that has frustrated me the most on this team this year, it is Geno Stone, and it is not even close. I understand Barrett Carter belongs at the top of that list there as well, but Geno Stone has just been abysmal, and he continues to be able to go out there and play for this team. That is one of the many head-scratching things with this team here at this point. But appreciate all the super chats here today. Appreciate all the viewership there as well. By the way, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And certainly make sure you hit that thumbs up icon if you haven't done so already there as well. And let's see. Maybe we'll just hang out here for a second in the chat. Everett, Everett, I appreciate the heck out of you. You're always here being loyal to us. And look, I understand that, I've said it at the top of the show. Zach Taylor is at the top of the list when it comes to play. His team went out there and did not score. So Everett makes the point in the chat. QB has had great years. You had a Triple Crown winner. Edge rusher was, second, the runner-up to the Defensive Player of the Year last year, and you still make the playoffs. That's on the head coach. Obviously, the head coach deserves a lot of blame here, and I do think people within the front office need to think critically about what to do at that spot, whether it be bringing him back or not. And, people laugh at me when I say that, but the front office right now is about 90% bring him back, 10% not. That's just the truth. That's how this organization operates. We saw Marvin Lewis be here forever. That's how they handle situations. I would argue at this point it should be 50-50, and the evaluation should continue over the course of the next 3 weeks. I'm just telling you how the organization thinks and believes. And people like to come at me saying, oh, you're crazy. I get that you don't agree, but that is how the organization views this. I would say there is about an 85 to 90% chance Zach comes back next year, and I would argue that it should be 50-50 here at this point. And I understand a lot of you would argue that it should be 100% no, but I'm just telling you how the organization operates. And we all should know how the organization operates because they've shown us over the course of the past several years. All right. Bearcats, before we get out of here, still have some time on the show. I want to talk about UC basketball. Okay, so they play Georgia, right? And, Georgia, SEC team, they're not a top team in college basketball by any stretch. They're not, a tournament team. I probably wouldn't say they're a tournament team. We'll see. It's obviously still very early here at this point. But, UC had the embarrassing game that they lost to Eastern Michigan at home, got embarrassed in the crosstown shootout. And, Wes's seat has gotten really, really hot. And I think part of the reason, Wes's seat is so hot is just because of the effort. We talked about that not being an issue for the Cincinnati Bengals, really, but I think for the Cincinnati Bearcats, the effort has been horrible. And it was, if you watch the end of that Georgia game, it was not good at all. And I just don't understand their philosophy. Because if you need to give credit to Wes for one thing, it's he can recruit, right? I mean, he's had talented players on his team, but it has not translated to wins at all for this team. And he's got like 40 million assistant coaches there with him. And you would think they'd be able to run some offense with all those brains put together with Wes Miller as well, and they can't run offense at all. Their offense is they'll hang out around the perimeter, kind of stare at each other, and then look up at the shot clock and say, oh, I guess we need to chuck a three, and then misfire on the three. The Cincinnati Bearcats love the three-point shot, and they don't know how to make the three-point shot. They shot sub 30% from three again in this game. And, Georgia wasn't shooting it well at all early, and there's a lot of stats if you kind of go down the list about it's like, well, Georgia, they're not shooting the ball particularly well. They're not rebounding particularly well. You would think Cincinnati has a good chance to win this game. Ultimately, it ends up being a blowout in favor of the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, coming into the year, I thought it was a make or break as far as West needing to make the tournament. This roster that he has, I understand it's hard to believe, especially when you watch them shoot free throws and they cannot make a singular free throw, it seems like. But this roster is talented enough to be a tournament team, and they don't even look close to being a tournament team here for Wes Miller. So I'm very confused as to, they don't run offense, right? Like, what do you guys do at practice? Do you just shoot, right? Do you just hang out, play horse, right? Play a little knockout maybe at the free throw line because they run no offense. They don't draw up anything for any of their players, and West doesn't get any matchups for any of his guys either, right? He just kind of relies on hopefully making some threes, and then hopefully some guys can win some one-on-one matchups and get to the rim. That's literally all he does, and it's really that to me. And I'm not a basketball nerd by any stretch, but you can watch them and say, okay, These other teams are running offense. You guys don't run offense. You just hang out there on that side. And they totally quit. The spread was 8.5, and then, UC got out to a big lead early in the game, which was promising. Georgia closed the distance. Boom, it's tied at halftime, and many Bearcat fans kind of knew there in that moment that, okay, they're in real serious trouble here. And they were able to hang within like 5 to 8 points there for a little bit in the second half. Then ultimately at the end, they kind of just gave up. And Georgia went on a run. Shots started falling. They were getting to the rim. Crowd was back on their side, and UC just didn't have any fight there. A couple of noteworthy things. One, if Baba Miller is not playing for them, they really don't have a chance, and they don't even have much of a chance with him. Okay, so, he had the technical foul, which is huge, right? In college, you have 5 fouls, right? And if you get a technical foul, that factors into that. So it was a huge foul, and then Baba's not playing. And they had to, play him in Day late with lots of fouls, which isn't ideal, but they didn't have a choice. Baba was nothing egregious, but he was kind of getting into it with an official. And if you do that at the college level, you're going to get teed up. And that's what happened. And when you're your best player and you get teed up when you're losing a game, you're in serious, serious trouble. And he had to go to the bench, and, it wasn't good for Cincinnati. And they're not good at all without Baba Miller out there. Abayev. I get he's a freshman, but when you get a recruit like that, you expect him to come in and do some really good things. He's shown promise on the offensive end, but defensively he's not good at all. And you saw Xavier just basically attack him there in the second half of that game. Other teams are starting to understand that, okay, if Abayev's out there, we'll just go right at him because he doesn't know how to defend. And, he's made some shots for him this year, but really hasn't shot the ball well enough, in my opinion, for the Cincinnati Bearcats. And, people talked about him as being like a potential first-round pick. I don't see that at all here at this point. You can see some of the talents there, but he's got to come back to school. And we'll see ultimately if that is in Cincinnati or somewhere else. Celestine kind of kept him in the game with his shooting. That was really the only thing that kept him in the game. I guess that's promising, seeing him shoot the ball a little bit better, the Baylor transfer. So that was nice to see some shots go in from the perimeter. But besides him, nobody shot the ball well. Day Thomas didn't make a three. We talked about this year kind of hoping that Day would have more of a different role. They need Day to score, and they need Day to be great. And ultimately that has not happened for this team here. And then Kirk Risa continues to not shoot the ball well at all. And, again, I don't if you have all your guys on your team and they don't shoot the ball well, maybe run some offense and try to draw something up and get to the rim, right? Set some screens, be a little bit creative and not just sit around the three-point line and stare at each other and chuck up a three at the end of the shot clock, which is kind of Wes's approach here. And, his seat is incredibly hot. I don't see the benefit of firing a guy mid-year, especially before conference play. But if this thing is continuously ugly throughout the Big 12 and, they're kind of eliminated early on from, like, being a tournament team, I think he kind of got to move off, right? I was excited when the Bearcats hired Wes Miller. Thought there was promise. Again, he recruits well, right? And maybe that'll buy him another year. But I don't know. Because he can't run offense. He can't translate it to anything. And now his team's given up a little bit on him. We'll see if that continues. I get it's tough, when it's like, okay, you definitely lost the game. Let's play super hard to the end. It's difficult to do that. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. But it's also an indictment on the coach, right? You got to want to go out there and compete for your coach. And, does it mean putting different bodies out there that are going to go out there and compete? Maybe. But if you watch the end of that game, they just mailed it in. And, completely opposite of how they started the game. They started the game with their hair on fire, and that was great to see. But they weren't able to sustain it over the course of a ball game, and I think they kind of realized early on in the second half, like, we're not going to win this. And you kind of saw the effort go downhill from there. So they got lots of issues. Mustafa Cham is a guy that should be a really good player for you. Right, he's a big guy. He can be physical, right? I think he's more physical than Bandego was for a couple of years, right? But he hasn't been good enough. They have size matchups each and every game, and they don't take advantage of them. Cham doesn't have the ability to take advantage of them, and they don't even really get the ball into the low post. Talked about that all through the Xavier game. It's like, get the ball inside, right? Let these guys have an opportunity to make a play at the rim. Use your advantages. They didn't do that in the game. As I mentioned, Kreese has got to shoot the ball better. They got to defend better. Right? They got to take care of the basketball better. They got to make their free throws. Right? I get it's college and not NBA, but if you go to the free throw line, you should feel decent about your team making free throws. This UC Bearcat team can't make free throws. Right? And Buck Harris, I love his effort and I love his athleticism, but he doesn't give you – he can't shoot the ball at all. He can't make a free throw. And sometimes when he's driving, he's wild and out of control, driving down the lane, right? So he's really athletic and he's great on defense. But from an offensive perspective, Sincere Harris is kind of a liability, which I didn't really expect that to be the case for Cincinnati. I thought he was going to at least be able to show some promise on the offensive side. So they've got a lot of issues. I don't know if there's a different lineup that they need to try. They just need their players that are good recruits and that have a lot of talent to play better basketball, right? And they need their coach to put them in some positions to succeed, get some easy baskets. When has UC drew something up where it's like, oh, that was an easy basket. That was good coaching right there. That was good execution. You haven't seen that at all throughout the course of the year, and ultimately that's embarrassing for the Bearcats. It's an indictment on their head coach, and we'll see if that gets fixed going forward. But the Big 12, they can play basketball in the Big 12 conference, and going into conference play, if you're the Cincinnati Bearcats, it does not look good whatsoever. And Wes very much coaching for his job. He needs to be very careful about what he says after the game. I get he's very frustrated, as he should be, but, you know, at some point he's got to – I don't know. It's funny because, you know, when Zach talks, people get mad about Zach Taylor talking. But his tone is totally different, and he's more understanding with, okay, this isn't acceptable. Whereas Wes, you hear him talk, and it's just like, I don't know. I don't like the vibe he's giving off, right? I don't like the vibe he's getting off. And it's kind of a just excuse after excuse after excuse for Wes Miller. And then he'll say he's not in the excuse business, which is like, well, then why are you making excuses? So I don't know. I just have a bit of a different energy for how I receive those post-game comments, because you got coaches that are not living up to the expectations, that are coaching for their jobs, and I definitely don't think Wes Miller is handling it as well as he should. We'll see if ultimately UC makes a change, but lots of pressure on the Bearcats going into conference play. This is a team that, again, on paper, we keep saying it, is a very talented team. And they have not been able to do anything with it. And unfortunately, it's kind of a recurring theme here in the Wes Miller era. And when you lose to Xavier like that, when you're the clear better team, there's a portion of the fan base that's going to be out on you regardless of what happens. And rightfully so. It's a huge game. And Wes has not performed well in that game at all. And we'll see if ultimately he can fix that or not. But we'll see if he has an opportunity to fix it or not going forward as well. A couple of huge injuries in the National Football League. Patrick Mahomes, ACL, he's done, and that's crazy. That, you know, the Chiefs, it's kind of been, you know, a fall from grace. Every year there's teams in the NFL that don't make the playoffs and they shock you. I don't think anybody thought the Kansas City Chiefs were not making the postseason after playing in the last 3 Super Bowls, winning 2 of them, and then they've got a lot of questions that they need to answer. I think some people have been maybe a little bit too hard on Mahomes. You know, it's funny as some people turn their head blindly and act, oh, he's still the greatest quarterback in the league. Be very clear here, Josh Allen and Joe Burrow in Buffalo. I don't know if you can put Burrow in there after his performance this past week, but Josh Allen has been a heck of a lot better. When you talk about best quarterback in the NFL right now, I think it's either Allen or Burrow, as much as you would love to have Mahomes in a do-or-die game or a do-or-die down in a huge moment. But, I mean, the consistency was not there from Patrick in this game. It wasn't as bad as maybe some people made it out to be, but he wasn't good enough this year, and we'll see if this injury is going to cost him any time next year. But they've got a lot of decisions that they need to make because, you know, people age quickly in the National Football League. Travis Kelce was not a good football player this year. Is this his last dance? Is he going to be done, or is he going to be back on a 1-year deal? I think it's either one or the other. And, from a football perspective, obviously you love what Kelce's been able to accomplish. I think he's the second best tight end in the history of the NFL behind Rob Gronkowski. But at some point, it's time to hang it up. It'll be very interesting to see if Kansas City brings him back or not. It's tough in these spots because he's done so much, has been such a great player for so long. But are you going to give him another year? Like, what he put on the football field this year isn't worth another year. So that's a huge decision that Kansas City is going to have to make. Be interested to follow that certainly as well. But the Chiefs out of the playoffs. The boogeyman is out. Could this be a open door for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills to make a run? What a come-from-behind performance in the game. The Bills obviously can beat anybody with Josh Allen. They've got holes all over their team, though. Consistency issues, but a huge comeback against a really good team in the New England Patriots. And, it'll be interesting to see what exactly transpires in the AFC playoffs because, again, Buffalo's got a bunch of holes, but when you're looking at how this thing's shaping out, don't you kind of feel like the Bills are the favorite here, right, with Josh Allen in place? So that'll be something certainly to watch as time goes on. But what a come-from-behind performance from him. And, of course, Micah Parsons. Looks like it's an ACL for him as well. Got to give credit to the Denver Broncos, right? Because they were playing bad football and winning earlier. Their quarterback was playing bad football. They were still finding ways to win. Well, now their quarterback's starting to play a little bit, right? And they just beat the Green Bay Packers. I understand it's at home, but the Green Bay Packers, that is a real legit football team. And the Denver Broncos took care of business. Bo Nix played well in the game. Unfortunately, Parsons has the injury. That is a huge loss, obviously, for the Green Bay Packers. They're still a Super Bowl contender, but now their defense, you remove him from the equation, that defense is nowhere near as good as it is, obviously, with Micah Parsons out on the football field. So, huge win for the Denver Broncos. I've been hesitant to give them, all of my respect and give them all the flowers, but I think now it's time to do it. After you get a big-time win like that, still wouldn't surprise me if they went one and done, but with the Patriots losing, they got their sights set on the number 1 seed. Sean Payton doing a tremendous job as the head coach of the Denver Broncos, and that defense is great. Their quarterback's starting to come along, and they deserve a lot of credit. Front runners now in the AFC as far as potentially getting that number 1 overall seed. Phillip Rivers, he returns to action, and crazy 44-year-old Grandpa Rivers out there in Seattle against that defense, and he played solid, right? Again, he wasn't going to go out there and throw for 250 and 3 touchdowns, but had 1 touchdown. I think he was around 50-ish maybe yards throwing the football, so not great, but again, 44 years of age against Seattle, right? Not against the Dallas Cowboys or the Cincinnati Bengals, the Seattle Seahawks, and he hung in there. They were winning control for much of that game, but Seattle ultimately pulls out and gets the victory. Not quite as high on Seattle as certainly I have been earlier in the year, but I kind of feel like I would take the Niners over the Seahawks there in that division as far as that second team behind the Los Angeles Rams. But Phillip Rivers back in action. Just some of those highlights are just crazy to watch, right? Where you're seeing him out there. It's like, what? Kind of takes you back in time a little bit seeing Phillip Rivers play the quarterback position again. Really, truly unbelievable. Off the street in an NFL game in Seattle and didn't embarrass himself by any stretch. Gave them an opportunity to win the football game. Browns get shellacked. Again, bad here in Cincinnati. Really, really bad. At least the Bengals are not the Cleveland Browns. Appreciate everyone, as always, for hanging out. Great viewership here on a Monday. Unfortunately, not the best results for Cincinnati sports teams here this weekend. Headline, of course, by the Bengals getting shut out 24-0. The Bearcats embarrassed themselves against Georgia there as well. But got a great week of programming here at the show. Again, we do this 10 to noon each and every day, Monday through Friday. Reed Mouse has the first hour off the bench, and then my show, 11 to noon, follows that. So if you were new to what we were doing here at Chatterbox here today, I would invite you to come back. I understand there's a little bit more intrigue immediately following a Bengals game, and certainly with the speculation of what to do at the head coach position here. But, we're going to do this all off season long. We'll do it for the rest of the year as well. We do it every day, so would love to have some of you guys back. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. We're on our way to 22,000 subscribers here at the channel, which certainly is exciting. And always drop a like on what we do there as well. And you can find our clips. They go out on YouTube. We'll have a couple of segments that go out on YouTube later today. And it's also out in podcast form as well, wherever you get the podcast, both Off the Bench and my show there as well. Appreciate everyone, as always, for tuning in. Appreciate the super chats here that we got today. That certainly means a lot to us as well. And, we will talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.